Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're mapping out the massive macroeconomic shockwaves of the 2026 global fuel crisis. Over the next few minutes, we're going to trace exactly how a localized regional conflict fundamentally disrupted the daily lives of billions, completely rewired global supply chains, and reshaped the entire future of energy investment. So let's just dive right into it by asking the simple question that was on literally everyone's mind. As prices surged at the pump and flights were suddenly grounded all over the world, why did the world run out of gas? How could the global energy grid actually become so vulnerable so quickly? Well, the answer lies in a chain reaction of incredibly fast-moving events that paralyzed the global economy. $118.35. That staggering number was the peak price of a single barrel of Brent crude oil on March 31st, 2026. And while prices definitely fluctuated later into the summer, this massive sudden spike sent absolute shockwaves through the financial markets. This wasn't just some abstract number on a trading floor, right? It was an immediate, heavy tax on every single good moving across the planet. And that massive price spike happened because 20% of the world's entire oil trade was suddenly choked off. Just imagine 1/5 of the blood supply in a human body instantly stopping. The closure of key shipping routes meant millions of barrels of oil and critical natural gas simply could not reach the countries that desperately needed them just to keep their lights on. Section 1. The choke point closes. To really understand how we got here, we have to look at the geographical epicenter of this crisis. When Qatar Energy invoked force majeure on March 3rd, it wasn't just standard corporate jargon. A localized conflict triggered a legal clause that physically trapped massive LNG tankers. They simply could not leave the Gulf, which left buyers around the world completely stranded. And the timeline of this escalation is just crazy. Within a matter of weeks, we go from sheer market panic to the actual physical destruction of critical infrastructure. On March 2nd, Brent crude surges up to 13%. Literally the very next day, Qatar Energy halts liquefaction and declares force majeure. And by March 18th, Qatar's Ras Laffan complex is physically hit, instantly erasing 17% of their capacity. Experts noted this kind of damage would take up to 3 to 5 years to repair. Section 2. Global economic shockwaves. The localized closure of the Strait of Hormuz didn't just stay in the Middle East. The macroeconomic impacts were immediate, and they were severe. The head of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, didn't mince words, calling it the largest energy security crisis the world has ever faced. So the crucial takeaway here is that this wasn't just a minor supply chain hiccup. It mirrored the devastating oil shocks of the 1970s. We are talking about severe disruptions across the board. Global inflation hit 3.53% by June, and the global GDP growth rate was revised down to just 3%. It hit absolutely everything, from the cost of shipping packages with FedEx to grounding airlines because North American jet fuel spiked by 95%. But even more alarmingly, a 30% disruption in global urea exports meant the cost of growing basic foods like corn and wheat skyrocketed, triggering a very real threat to worldwide food security. Section 3. Asia's supply chains scramble. No region felt this energy chokehold faster or harder than Asia. When you realize that nearly 3/4 of the oil flowing through that strait was destined for just 4 Asian powerhouses, China, India, Japan, and South Korea taking 70% of it, you understand exactly why the region was thrown into an unprecedented panic to secure whatever fuel they could find. The everyday reality of this supply shock meant drastic, sometimes wild measures. We saw Thailand launch the Fry to Fly program, where citizens were actually trading used cooking oil for diesel to make aviation fuel. Bangladesh shut down shopping malls by 7 p.m. and closed universities just to save power. Over in Egypt, they dimmed streetlights and mandated work-from-home days, while Slovenia strictly rationed fuel to just 50 liters per day for private motorists. Necessity truly became the mother of invention. Section 4. Europe's energy nightmare returns. Meanwhile, Europe found itself facing an all-too-familiar crisis, right on the heels of the 2022 supply shocks. With Qatari LNG shipments suspended, Europe's vulnerability was completely exposed. Because they had just come out of a harsh winter, European gas storage sat at just 30% capacity, meaning their safety buffer was practically gone. Consequently, Dutch TTF gas benchmarks nearly doubled to over €60 per megawatt hour. This economic pain hit consumers immediately, sparking protests and severe political pressure. Section 5. Winners, losers, and rations. Now, in global macroeconomics, a crisis for one nation often creates a massive windfall or buffer for another. It's fascinating how nations with domestic reserves or massive stockpiles capitalized on the exact same event that drove others to emergency rationing. While gig workers in Vietnam were devastated by doubling fuel prices, Kenya faced 25% public transport fare hikes, and South Sudan had to start rolling power cuts. But look at the flip side. The United States saw its crude exports surge to a record 12.9 million barrels a day. Algeria leveraged its LNG to enter highly lucrative new talks with Europe, and China managed to insulate itself using its massive 1.4 billion barrel strategic reserve. Every single government had to pull different economic levers just to keep their economies afloat. The Philippines was actually the first to just straight up declare a national energy emergency. India cut excise duties, New Zealand issued direct $50 tax credits to working families, and South Africa allowed local petrol stations to start rationing diesel. Leaders everywhere were desperately trying to shield their citizens from the brutal reality of the global market. Section 6. The New Energy Reality. Ultimately, this conflict fundamentally altered the long-term trajectory of global energy security. The IEA reported that oil investment fell for a third year, dropping to $490 billion, while natural gas hit a 10-year high at $330 billion. But here's the wild part. The desperate scramble for reliable baseload power drove a massive step backward for emissions. Coal reached its highest investment level since 2012, hitting $180 billion, simply because countries needed to guarantee their lights would stay on. But simultaneously, the sheer volatility of fossil fuels forced a massive, accelerated pivot toward decentralized renewables and electric vehicles to escape the grip of the global oil market. The high prices did what years of policy struggled to do. They made renewables incredibly cost-competitive overnight. In fact, April 2026 saw Europe's strongest month for EV sales on record and the highest UK solar installation since 2012. This shift wasn't just for the environment anymore, it was out of sheer economic self-preservation. Which leaves us with a critical thought to end this explainer. As global supply chains are forced to completely rewrite their routes, how fragile is the energy powering your everyday life? When a single choke point can paralyze the globe in a matter of weeks, true energy independence might be the only real security left. The events of 2026 showed us exactly how interconnected and how vulnerable our modern world truly is. Thank you for joining me to explore this complex web, and keep asking the big questions about the systems that power our world.